I can hear you.
I can hear you too.
Same, I can hear you.
I can hear you too.
I can hear
Me
you.
Do me
too.
a favor. There's apparently some kind of malfunction in some way, because I'm not seeing the names. I usually see the names on the masthead. I see them on the top of the screen, but not on the, on the participant list. Could anyone who can't hear me or can hear me, just let me know one way or the other, just so I can get a feeling for how many people can't hear me. It's I can hear you, not I could hear you. Please don't confuse those two. Okay. All right. All right. A lot of people can hear me. I'm not sure why a couple of people have had trouble. But those who've had trouble, I'll type it in.
Professor, are you hearing me?
Yes.
We are not hearing you.
A lot of people can hear me. All right. Okay. I'll try to. Okay. Here. Please see message. All right, that's all I can do. There's something a little off tonight. I'm not sure why, but I will take attendance and we'll see how bad the problem is. Okay. If you can hear me and you're here, please let me know. Albright, Janaya, Beatriz Eldana, Nuri Aritza.
Here.
Okay, Andre Asubantang. Halima Badawi.
Here.
Dana Balakalova.
I'm here.
Bradler Balthazar.
I'm here, and Professor, some students are saying that they're in the waiting room. I don't know if you can see them or not, but
I can't. No, I just pressed admit all.
Professor, excuse me, it's Dana Balakirova. Did you hear me?
I did.
Thank you.
Bradler, is Bradler here?
yeah, I'm here. I'm the one who said that there were some
Oh,
students in
okay.
the waiting
All
room.
right, I couldn't see it. Annam.
I'm here.
Thank you. Tiffany. Tiffany. David Eubanks.
I'm here.
Mohammed Faisal.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you. Ken Hui.
Oh, here.
Thank you. Henry. Henry
Here.
Huang.
Here.
Jason Hudson.
Here.
Tarek Kauser.
Here.
Shanice Lawson.
Here.
Andy Lynn.
Here.
Yan Biao Lin.
Here.
Kevin Moy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Joshua.
Here.
Thank you. Anna Marmo.
Here.
Alexis Montano.
Here.
Cameron Nahar. Cameron. Nahar, Nefertari Pal,
I'm here.
thank you. Deanna. Deanna. Tinza.
I'm here.
Payam? Okay. Saima Rahman,
Here.
thank you. Salman Raja,
Here.
Lexus. Theus, Lexus. Jacqueline Torres,
I'm here.
okay. Annie Van. Annie. Dimitrov Lysenko. Okay, I kind of heard that. Yoland, can you hear me
Here
now?
now. Here.
All right, gotcha. Kearney. I'm sorry, Corrine. Corrine Williams.
I'm
Misread
here.
that. Marvin Zarilla. Marvin. Okay, I don't see anyone in the waiting room. I have slightly more mark showing on the list than are marked presence. I'll try. I'm going to read off the absent people. If you're here, please let me know. Janaya Albright. Janaya.
Here.
You're here? Okay. Beatriz Aldana. Andre Asubanteng.
Here.
Thank you. Tiffany Chen. Tiffany. Cameron Nahar. Deanna Price. Deanna. Lexus Theus. Annie Van. And Marvin Zarilla. Any of those people present? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For some reason, there's 2 more, but sometimes people aren't at the screen or something, so. All right. Send a couple of messages. All right, I'm going to type the people marked absent. If anyone couldn't hear me, please let me know. Beatriz. Darn. Tiffany Chen. Cameron. Deanna. Lexus. And Annie and Marvin.
Professor, there's people in the waiting room.
Okay. Darn, I don't see them, and I don't see any way to admit them. Here, okay. All right, I see Lexus. Lexus, are you here? Lexus? Lexus, present. I don't know what the problem is. All right, well, I think most people can hear me at this point. I'm not sure why there's been some problem. You know what I'll try to do? I'll unplug my camera for a second, then and let's see if okay. I don't know if that helps at all or not. I don't know enough about the technology to address any kind of issue. All right, I think most people can hear me now, if not everyone. So I'll move forward. Tonight I am going to show you a video about Robert Moses, about whom I was talking last time. I'm going to try to remember to stop the recording when the video goes on to avoid violating copyright issues, especially because I normally wouldn't care, but it's going on to YouTube, so they may not allow it on. With the other class, I forgot to turn it off and I just didn't post the video. At this time, I'll try to remember. But in any case, just to refresh your memory. Now, before I get into that, there's a couple of administrative things. First of all, there's the paper is due tonight, so you guys should be finishing that up, if not already finished. Are there any questions about it at this point?
What time is it due?
The official time is midnight. If you get it like a half hour late or something, it'll still work. I think I gave you 2 extra hours, but don't wait
Okay, thank you.
last minute, because I always get people who think they posted it and it doesn't work for some reason. So try to do it. Within the time. If there's a problem, there's an extra hour or two that you can.
I got a question. I tried to upload my essay and the turn-in thing, the link you put, not the link, but where you put it in, but it's not letting me add a link. It's not letting me upload anything. It just keeps saying
When did you try to do it? I had put the wrong due date, but then I changed it, so it should be okay now. But if you're still having trouble, I'll put my home email address. If it absolutely doesn't work, let me put in my, I forgot to put the people marked absent, my home email address in the chat. And you can email it there, but try one more time, okay? Because I think it'll work now.
All right, thank you.
All right, so if you send it to that email address in the chat, that'll be okay if you can't do it. One thing that sometimes happens is the thing doesn't accept the paper, it gets overloaded or something like that, and it doesn't accept the paper, and then a few people are surprised that they couldn't upload it. But usually it should work, so we'll go with that. Anyone?
Everyone explore new worlds and ideas. Support your PBS station.
This didn't go to where I thought it would. But you know what? I'm going to start right at the beginning of the video. But before I turn it on, let me review for a second some of the considerations you should be looking for. All right, someone else just arrived, Deanna. Some of the considerations you should be looking for when you watch the video. If you recall last time, I talked about the The personal and positional sources of power is described in Wetton and Cameron. And I said that personal sources of power have to do with things like personal attraction, being knowledgeable, knowledge is power, expertise, effort, putting out a huge amount of effort, and legitimacy, that you're acceptable to, given the norms of society. The norms are the standards of behavior. So you can often, if you want to see what a society values, you see what kind of people they appoint to be leaders, because such people will exemplify social norms. At the same time, so those are the personal sources. At the same time, there are positional sources of power. Centrality, that you're at the center of a network of influence, that you're connected to people. I talked about David Rockefeller having 10,000 names in his Rolodex, one of whom was Robert Moses, incidentally. There was definitely a liaison and ultimately a rejection of Moses by the Rockefellers, but he definitely worked with them, not least in the construction of the United Nations headquarters on land that the Rockefellers donated to the United Nations, and Moses was in charge of the construction of it. And as well, so centrality, criticality, dealing with things that are important, or relevance, you could combine that with relevance, that you're doing something that's socially important, or when I say socially, to the firm, it would be to the needs of the firm. To society at large, it would be what's important to society in general. But Moses was doing stuff that was highly relevant to what was needed at that point in time. And as well, that you're visible, that you're doing stuff that gets attention in a company, that you're working with the higher ups, and this is really bizarre. I have 37 people here on it says on the thing 37, but I have less than that who said they were here. So I'm going to try one more time. I'm sorry to keep doing this, but Beatrice, Tiffany.
Yes, I'm here.
Beatrice is here. Okay. Tiffany, is Tiffany here? Cameron, is Cameron here? Lexus Theus, Annie Van, Marvin. Are any of
I'm
those?
here. Annie?
Annie, okay. And Lexus, I thought I saw that name on the screen. Lexus? All right. Okay, so well, at least we're getting close to everybody. So basically, what I want you to look for is how Moses uses, the positional sources of power, centrality, relevance, visibility, and flexibility, and also the personal sources of power, attraction. And you can argue that he wasn't all that attractive in many ways, but he was certainly, I explained that he had won over Iphigenie Knox Sulzberger, the owner of the New York Times, by building playgrounds, and they conferred a considerable degree of legitimacy on him, even when things turned south. I think the point that I'm trying to make with this video is that Moses had used all these techniques to, and also the influence techniques, reason, reciprocity, and retribution, that he won people over by belief, and he was vicious. He could be vicious. I told you about moving the aquarium to Brooklyn from Wall Street when they resisted him. And he did many, many vicious things to people. He would, if they fought him, he would just plow forward, steamroll over them, and start construction without debate. And everyone was afraid of him. he was highly manipulative. He was very Machiavellian. He would write, he would assign powers to himself in a law without telling anyone, and no one would read it. Few people would read it, and even if they did, they wouldn't understand what it was saying. And he would get the law passed, and he would then announce that he had all these powers. But you can also see in the video, you'll see in the video how crucial his personal network was. And when it talks about Robert Taft, his classmate at Yale, the son of the only president in history to also have been a Supreme Court Chief Justice, William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft's son, Robert Taft, helped Moses get the huge powers of city manager, construction manager, and that put him in charge of every construction project in the city that received any kind of government money, regardless of what it was or who was doing it. It had to go through him. This was all done without really any debate or public knowledge of any of it. So basically, I want you to look for where all these techniques, including the influence techniques, reason, reciprocity, and retribution, reason being closely related to legitimacy, and reciprocity, the huge cash monies related to banking, insurance, construction, and so on. And apply these concepts to what he did. What I also want you to do is contextualize it. You're going to learn a lot about New York's history. And what I want you to think about is how these play out in real life. To what degree are they real? I mean, there's also the big question of why the coalition put together by Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs is the author of a classic book on urban planning, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and she became a well-known social critic. She moved to Canada during the Vietnam War, but continued to have a voice in America until her death about 15 years ago. And the question is, though, I mean, even given that Jacobs was part of a very sophisticated group, she knew Saul Alinsky, she visited him. Hurwitz, in his biography of Alinsky, says that she visited Alinsky in Chicago while this was going on. And the things that they talk about in the video, such as building alliances, come right out of Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, and his other book, Reveille for Radicals. And basically, though, was that enough? I mean, it's true that they were, as they say in the video, several people make the point that they were sophisticated organizers, that the village had been an activist community going back, 80, 90, 100 years. But was that enough? What other characteristics of these neighborhoods in 1960, when Moses could actually make the case that Greenwich Village and Soho, Little Italy, and Chinatown were blighted areas that needed to be redeveloped? What about that? What about those communities might have been a little bit different from, the so-called outer boroughs, the neighborhoods that he destroyed in the Bronx and Brooklyn, and to a lesser degree, also to a lesser degree, Queens wasn't as developed in that period. It developed later. Brooklyn was already a huge city. And so what was maybe a little bit different about Lower Manhattan? Maybe think about that. But also, try to see why it is that the Jacobs Coalition, I'm just using her name, it was much bigger than her, although she became the leader of it and was the theorist behind it. I'm also going to play a little bit more than I used to from the video, because I think it's useful to have the context in which Moses's the peak of his power and then his decline occurred. So I'll put that on now. I'll turn off the recording. They make it clear that a lot of the urban renewal and the kind of construction, the highways and the performing arts centers, the eminent domain, applied through Title I and Title II of the Urban Renewal Act, and the construction of the public housing, all of this stuff very much drove a large share of the city's economy out. In particular, there were two chief reasons. One was that he deliberately removed a lot of the small manufacturing. Where I grew up in Long Island City, I grew up in Astoria, Queens, and Long Island City, and it's still there, but huge areas in Brooklyn and Upper Manhattan were just completely devastated. They removed all the factories and went elsewhere in the country, in the South, and this removed. It wasn't just that the factories and the manufacturing jobs, as Pete Hamill mentions, were eliminated, but the innovation that arises from small business was removed. And so a lot of what had been the innovation in New York that created new businesses and whole new major corporations was removed, and that kind of innovation stopped occurring in New York. And I think a kind of a parallel was that when he built the World Trade Center, or when they built, it was a little slightly after him. Well, I think he was involved in planning it. I think it was actually constructed it after he was finally removed. When they built that, the site where the A&P Corporation, which by the 40s had become the largest retailer in America, and it was founded on the site of the World Trade Center, and the World Trade Center simply removed all the businesses in that district, and that site was converted into a super block, in effect, probably the biggest one, the World Trade Center. At the same time, a resident of Brooklyn who had gone to college in Northern Michigan State University but lived in Manhattan, named Howard Schultz, got the idea to turn a coffee company in Seattle into a chain of coffee shops called Starbucks. And when Schultz planned that whole thing, he saw no reason to be in New York. He simply he found a place in San Francisco, I think it was, and he found, he started in Seattle. There's a long story to it, which is irrelevant, but basically the idea that you go to New York to do that was like long past. So, basically this transferal of the economy away from the city was closely linked to a lot of the theories that Moses was applying, of Le Corbusier and others. And basically they were replacing the idea of like an intensive urban landscape with a landscape that is constructed horizontally rather than vertically. And that kind of gutted New York City. It basically gutted it, but I think it also had an unfortunate effect on our society in terms of both the kinds of creative ideas that became acceptable and the way that businesses strategized. I think the reduction in urban life had an unfortunate effect on all of that. But beyond that, speaking more directly to the issue of power, which is really why I wanted you to see this, I think in the end, when Moses lost to Jane Jacobs, it was in part for the reasons they say, but I think there was a much simpler explanation. Moses wanted to, he had defined as blighted, and you can see how insane he had become, and that the whole concept of urban renewal still is in many ways. I don't think it's ever really changed. But how insane he was, that he was describing neighborhoods that people come from all over the world to visit New York to see. Greenwich Village, Soho, Chinatown, Little Italy in the Godfather movies, and he called them slums. I mean, but more than that, it was that the immense value of that land and of the alternative uses to being turned into a highway were so big that the economic incentives simply weren't on his side. And I forgot to mention that I said that there were a couple of reasons why he harmed the economy of the city. And I said the first one, which was that he simply displaced a lot of the factory life. But the other one, which they also mentioned in the movie, and I'm sure you noticed, was that they built highways in the middle of many, many neighborhoods that made retail difficult, if not impossible, and culminated in the collapse of neighborhoods like the South Bronx, which totally eliminated tax revenues from thousands of small businesses that were eliminated by the highway construction that destroyed the neighborhoods. So you had both direct displacement of manufacturing, and you had also the indirect harm done to small business through the road construction. So, and this led to the desolation of a lot of areas. I used to live just due north of Greenpoint in Astoria, and if you followed the BQE, you saw what happens under the BQE. Those neighborhoods at the time the BQE was built, that was like a really vibrant area with a lot of restaurants and stuff, and that whole tax base was eliminated. Not that the roads serve no purpose. Anyone would have to admit that to participate in the modern economy, the roads were needed, but did they have to be done the way they were done, and did they have to be so disruptive? I think the answer is no. And basically, I think more, as much as anything, this story illustrates the theory of power that I mentioned last time, related to Jeffrey Pfeffer and Solanchik, and their idea that when power is aligned with institutional needs and it's securing resources needed to support the current institutional needs, then it's being used well. And I think that characterizes Moses's career early on. As he built more and more roads, they became less and less important, and the way he did it became more and more of an issue, especially when the roads were moved to the urban centers, and he was disrupting literally maybe one out of 20 or so New Yorkers were probably upended, forced to move by his construction. So it's it's 10,000 here, 10,000 there, and you basically you keep coming into huge numbers of people who were forced to move and be traumatized by the road construction, and there was very little thought done to how do you minimize those problems. And so the costs began to get greater and greater while the benefits were getting smaller and smaller. And at a certain point, the costs start to exceed the benefits. And it's unclear when that happened. But I think what the video also makes clear is that a lot of the construction that he did post-war, like in the public housing, wasn't all that intelligent. That he was good at the roads and the parks and the bridges, that he was good at. The public housing and some of the other things were far less intelligent. And yet his power was institutionalized. The Times never shied from backing him, including, I have to be like quite explicit that Moses's values were explicitly racist. I know it's a word that's thrown around easily, but if you look at the Power Broker, the book that Robert Caro wrote, it's totally clear what he was doing, and it started with the construction of the parkways that didn't allow buses, and the buses couldn't get to the beaches because you only had access via the parkways, so poor people couldn't go to the beaches, or it was difficult. And this was done completely with complete intention. And he also did this in the construction of the city swimming pools. He built a whole host of swimming pools. It's like a footnote in the long list of things he built, but the public swimming pools in the city were things he built, and they were almost all built in white neighborhoods. And it got worse with the urban renewal in the construction of the city housing. So basically, the Times, while this was all happening, was not only, basically supporting him, but was cheering him on. If you questioned him, it was like you were stupid. You were either stupid or crooked, or there was something wrong with you. And basically, it was very difficult to criticize him, which is why he continued to have power. And there were other reasons, of course, like, one of which was that he had written into the bond covenants of the public authorities that he couldn't be removed or the loans would be in default. He was amazingly Machiavellian. And I think he exemplified most of the principles of power, except for the one about likability. He was good at being likable to people in power. He was a sycophant to the right people, whether it was Alfred Smith or Iphigenia Sulzberger. I don't think he was likable to the public when they saw him firsthand, but they had no trouble with him when he was not visible to them, but was doing all these great works, and then he became sort of a sacred cow. And so I think the likable part was the one thing that he lacked, but otherwise he had effort, legitimacy, expertise. Needless to say, he designed a lot of the parks and bridges. He designed a lot of this himself. He created the public authorities and so on. The whole concept of the toll bridge in modern America was his creation. And on top of that, he used, he obviously had the positional sources of power, centrality, relevance, visibility, and flexibility. That all goes without saying. But he also had the three influence techniques: reason, reciprocity, and retribution. And I would say the one of the other areas where he doesn't quite match Whetten and Cameron's model is that he used retribution and reciprocity to a great degree, along with reason. He certainly had the public imagination. people knew he had built Jones Beach, that he had built the Triborough Bridge, that he had built, the highways out on Long Island, the Northern State, and so on. And many of these roads were, quite beautiful and beneficial, but at the same time, he went much further, and at that point, he stopped being so popular. What Marshall, who teaches at CUNY, by the way, what he was saying was that a lot of people really hated him by 1962. But if you listen to the public earlier, like in the 1940s and 30s, he was publicly liked. Although when he once ran for office for governor, he lost dramatically. He just didn't have the public, the common man's touch. But I think as an administrator, he was well liked, and people didn't understand how manipulative he was, which was not ever discussed by the New York Times or the other newspapers. So I think on the whole, he basically sort of illustrates the Wetton and Cameron story, the model they have, but not perfectly. I think he's a lot more Machiavellian than they say, and he used power a lot more viciously than the Wetton and Cameron model suggests. Okay, now, before you go, next week is a holiday. I hope you know that. So we will have off, and don't forget that your paper is due tonight. So, you should get that in if you haven't already. I'll stay on board. You're free to go now unless you have any questions. Do you have any questions about or comments? Anybody?
Professor, what time is the essay due?
Midnight.
Thank you, Professor. Have a
You're
nice night.
welcome. You too.
Hi, Professor. I have a question in regard to my research. I mean, my 1 second. My goal setting paper. I put my goals as a few of them, but I just want to make sure that I just want to touch up on them since we're open.
Okay. Could you hold on 1 second? I just have to go to the bathroom for a second. I'll be right back.
All right.
Thanks for waiting. Thanks for waiting, Joshua. So what were you going to ask?
So I have a couple goals. I just want to maybe get some feedback from you. Oh, do you think
I'll
it's?
give you feedback. You can work on it. It's pointless to redo it now. I'll, I'll get back to you with it.
No, it's fully packed. I just was confused because when they said in the book about specific and measurable, and they actually said this in chapter 6. Was it chapter 6? Yeah, it was chapter 6 that they mentioned that creating a goal setting paper, I mean, becoming involved in goal setting, you have to have a specific goal. And they said for the company's whatever return, you have to increase this, like specific amounts and time based.
Yeah.
You have to get this done within 3 weeks.
Right,
Like
the SMART principle, SMART
the
goal.
SMART principle. I just feel like I don't know. I don't know if it's completely honest, but at the same time, maybe I should have said getting A's instead of achieving academically, or say, I don't know.
Oh, that's all right. That's clear enough. I think where I really look for the specificity, and a lot of students have trouble, is knowing what industry they want to go into. In recent years, it's gotten a lot more focused because I think because of the economy being so terrible, that students have to really hustle early in their academic careers and focus. But I still you sound like you kind of know, you pretty much know what you want to do. The one thing I didn't hear from you is like that you're working on achieving it at this point.
Yes, I am working on achieving it by going to school, but meeting with people. I have connections in the past. I could go to the same boss. He said, if you come back with a degree, we could do something with you.
Oh, that's good, Joshua. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
So that's a good idea.
I didn't mention that, but that's.
Yeah, we'll focus on that, rather than the restaurant. That's sort of.
No, I only shortly I mentioned it in short. Only I wrote to practice supportive communication because I think it's very important.
Good.
Supportive communication, being congruent, being owned in your sentences.
Good. Sounds like you're really getting a lot out of the class.
Professor,
Yes.
have you watched A Tale from Bronx Tale?
Yes.
So when I was watching the Robin Moses thing, I was thinking about that movie and how in that movie is like there's a culture around every street corner and Italians. And
Yeah.
since you said like Robin Moses built all the highways and did
Yeah.
that essentially destroy the culture of New York City?
A lot of it. Yeah. Yeah. There was so much more. Huge areas that used to have that quality were destroyed. That movie was actually filmed in Astoria, even though it's about the Bronx. It was filmed about I don't know, about 20 blocks from where I grew up. But it was on Ditmars Boulevard, and I remember when it was closed down for the filming. And if you want to see another movie, I drove to Brighton Beach on Saturday, and my friend wanted to go to a Korean massage place down there. I'm all the way up here in the Catskills, so it's a long drive. But as I was driving into Brooklyn, I saw they have a sign on the belt, "Welcome to Brooklyn, how sweet it is." And that I don't know if you've seen that sign, but I laughed out loud because that's from Jackie Gleason. That was one of Jackie Gleason's famous lines, and he doesn't use it in The Honeymooners, but I think the reason they put it up there is The Honeymooners, which is one of the truly classic TV shows, takes place in Brooklyn. And there's a book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, and it's about how, like, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, in the 20th century, people did things together. They did things like they joined bowling leagues and they participated in community activities. And Putnam wrote this huge book. It's a brilliant book about how this community life has just declined over time. Like people used to bowl in leagues, now they bowl alone. People used to participate in political activities and now they don't. People used to, and on and on. People used to have dinner with each other and they don't. And just like a month or two ago, I got the complete set of The Honeymooners, which was Jackie Gleason's famous television show. I think it still airs on WPIX. And I watched all 30, there's only 39 episodes. I watched all 39 and it blew my mind because like so many things in that TV series capture the community spirit. They belong to the Raccoon Lodge and there's the bowling league and and on and on. They do things together and they have dinner at each other's houses and they get visits from relatives and the mother-in-law comes over and they get into a big argument and on and on and on. And all those things have been destroyed. And a lot of it was the stuff in the video, that was done directly in this heavy-handed way by Robert Moses. But I think it's also, the technology has facilitated this much more privatized life. And I think it was a combination of the two. They're like, you sit at home and you're on the internet and you don't have that much human contact and you have no community, people are just not interconnected the way they were. So I emailed Robert Putnam, the author. I told him, I just watched The Honeymoon, and they actually used the phrase bowling alone in one of the episodes, in the early episodes. And I emailed him and I said, I was just watching The Honeymooners. It blew me away how much it captured of your book. And he got all excited. He wrote back to me and he said, he said, I saw The Honeymooners when it first came out. I'm old enough that, in other words, it came out, I think in 55. It just ran for one season. And he said, I was old enough to watch it. I remember it. And, I really appreciate you brought back so many memories for me. But the thing is, like, if you read Bowling Alone and you compare it to The Honeymooners, you see how the world has changed and how isolated people have become and how sort of desocialized they've become, and a lot of that was the Robert Moses stuff, but it's also the role of technology. And now with the lockdowns and the way people leaving the city, it's just going to get worse. It's going to, things are going to get even more kind of dehumanized in that way.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I always saw like old ladies hanging around in a group, socializing.
Yeah.
Now I just see a bunch of Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, Chase, Popeyes, corporations.
Yeah. And a point I made in the other class, which I should have made, but it was late, but basically, I don't think Robert Moses really lost. They kind of say in the show, well, Jane Jacobs beat him. And I told you about the thing with John Lindsay with it, and then Governor Rockefeller eventually got rid of him with the help of his brother, and they didn't worry about the bond covenants because David Rockefeller was the, big banker and everything. But the thing is, I don't think Robert Moses really lost. I think what happened was they removed him because he was too heavy-handed, but they kept doing the same things. They just do it in a less obvious way. And a lot of it is what you just said, that, what might be called the McDonaldization or the Disneyfication of the city, the replacement of all these great neighborhoods with, chains and impersonal, large-scale public, not public, but large-scale housing developments, often not public. I think more common is the private ones, and they're almost all targeted at high-income people, and the city was largely turned into a haven for global rich people. And the average New Yorker, the Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton of the Honeymooners, those kind of people have all been gradually driven out of the city altogether.
Yeah, I saw this on the news. With all the corona lockdowns and the small businesses shutting down, these small businesses are leaving New York, and there's a bunch of field real estate. So Chase, Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, they're buying all that field estate, and it's gonna get worse, I guess. There's gonna be more Chases, more Dunkin' Donuts. It's gonna be less New York of New York.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, a number of years ago, I walked around Chinatown on the Lower East Side, and there's so much of that kind of development going on. And, you know, I always loved Chinatown. And, you know, still a lot of it's there, but a lot of it's being displaced. And the stuff that's built, like the redevelopment, is always wretched. I mean, it's just completely uninteresting. And the really cool stuff is like the few blocks that are left that are old and, you know, have really cool stores in it and stuff like that. You know, and I saw that too, just like you have on the Upper West Side. I lived there until 2009. I lived there from 96 until 2009. And, you know, I just saw all these really great places just leaving, the old barbecue stores and all kinds of interesting places, the Chinese restaurants with the green wallpaper and like all these great old things that were so much part of New York culture for decades, you know, and all leaving and being replaced by either like $200 a dinner restaurants or, you know, Banana Republic or what have you, you know, and lots of drugstores probably selling, you know, oxycodone to prescription buyers and banks, you know, and so on. And so little interesting construction, only things that could pay the high rents. It's really sad.
To me, it seems like New York is getting to be a place where it's only for the rich, like
Yeah.
the richer. So I was asking, for a young person like us, college students, is it economically viable to stay in New York?
Well, you know, I think you could, I think what you have to do is explore the markets, the housing market. A long time ago, I started to realize if you make $100,000 a year in the Catskills, you're much richer than if you make $200,000 a year in Manhattan. You know what I mean? Like a lot has to do with your rent payments, which in the city have exploded for many decades. I mean, even when I got out of college in '75, I was able to find, it was with great difficulty, I have to be clear, but I was able to find a studio for $200 a month at Tudor City, right next to the UN. And that kind of thing is long gone. They went co-op long ago. And, you know, that basically it's so hard to find a decent place. And, you know, I know a lot of my students just have have trouble finding any kind of decent housing. They often live in crappy places, or they you know, they live 5 to an apartment, or, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, I don't know what to say exactly. You have to, you know, you have to explore. I think the mistake a lot of people make is assuming that the city is the only place, because really what's happened is that a lot of the industry has moved, you know, kind of like I was saying in the video, was saying that a lot of the industry has moved to other places, and, you know, a lot of them are a lot cheaper than the city. So, you know, it might make sense not to stay in New York, but at the same time, I mean, depending on what happens after COVID, it could be there's a lot of opportunities as things come back. So, you know, it's hard to know without, you know, being there and seeing what's actually happening on the ground.
Professor, I was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, that's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, he's talking about the rat race, and this is one thing I noticed because I worked in minimum wage for about 4 years. Seems like most of the jobs available for young people are minimum wage jobs. Is it a coincidence that that's happening and all the jobs are being outsourced to different countries? Could it be that they're making the rat race, you know, deeper for young people and harder to get out?
Yeah. That's, well, it's not just that, Kevin. It's also, as they raise the minimum wage, it's going to be harder to find a job at all. So like there's going to be increasing numbers of college grads who just don't find a job for years. And it's going to get worse. So there's a lot of complicated issues. One is that the wages have been forced down through a combination of inflation, monetary expansion, which has funded plants leaving their traditional locations and moving overseas, or moving, as the video depicted, to the south or to the suburban areas. So there was that, and increasing regulation has made it more difficult for firms to get started. So there's been less job creation than there might have been. As well, I think there's probably been like huge numbers of, in other words, they expanded the numbers of college grads, so you're competing with more and more other people. So there's like a surplus of college grads combined with higher regulation and costs imposed on small businesses, which then move away or move to other countries. And if you increase the regulation, like the minimum wage, you reduce the availability of jobs. The reason is, like, if you're working for a minimum wage at $10 an hour or $12 an hour, and they increase it to 15, then either they're going to have to cut back on some kind of benefits, or they won't be able to afford to pay you the 15. So they're going to employ fewer people and invest in technology that replaces labor. So you see more and more places like using automatic checkout and computer systems that replace supervisory functions, things like that. Because the labor has become more expensive due to regulation. So, there's definitely going to be effects like that, without a doubt.
Professor, these are my last two questions. Do you think New York City is doomed? And if you had to move to another state, which would it be?
I don't think the city is doomed. New York will always come back, but it'll come back in new ways. The New York I grew up in the 50s and 60s, still had like a lot of the neighborhoods, but a lot of destruction had already been done. But there was still a lot of people who could walk to work and stuff. I saw all that come to an end. I saw the city turned into Disneyland, in effect. And when I lived, I even as recently as 10 or 15 years ago, I was watching it happen on the Upper West Side. Now there's a whole other set of problems. I think, first of all, they've raised costs of doing business in a lot of ways. There's higher crime. A lot of people have left the city. There's been so much regulation on the businesses, and many of them can't afford to function. So what the outcome of that will be, I have no idea. The city could come back, but in a more restrictive way than it has been. It maybe just open to very wealthy people, or I don't know exactly what it'll be. Maybe it'll go the other way. It'll just become so crime ridden that the wealthy people will leave, and it'll just become, the way places like New Haven and Bridgeport. I used to own some property in New Haven, and it had really been gutted by by various policies. And there are plenty of examples of that in New York State. I mean, if you look at upstate New York, the cities in upstate New York have almost all been destroyed by the policy mix that the state has adopted. The city could afford, higher taxes and stuff, and places like Utica and Binghamton the industrial base just wasn't vibrant enough. And when one or two companies closed, in the case of Binghamton, IBM was the dominant employer there. In the case of Kingston, New York, IBM. And when companies like GE, IBM closed, there was nothing to replace them. So places, Utica also had a big GE thing. I think it was Utica, Herkimer was nearby. And GE closed and IBM closed a lot of plants, and nothing really came to replace them. So a lot of these places are shell cities. I've been redeveloping a private house in a town called Stamford, New York, and I'm putting a lot of money into it, hopefully set to sell at a profit. But the thing is, that's a city that, or a village, it's really a village that at one time was a vacation center and then stopped being that, and it just completely was gutted. The cost of rehabbing buildings there couldn't possibly be recaptured by the economic values of the properties. And it just sat dormant for a long time. Now with the exodus from the city, I'm hoping to capitalize on it. If not, I'll lose some money. If it does work, then I'll make some money. But basically, that could happen to New York too. I mean, why not? There's some kind of guarantee that it won't. I'm not saying it necessarily will. The guarantee, Kevin, has traditionally been that the Fed creates money. I think we've talked about this already, have we? I probably addressed it in the class anyway, that the Fed has made a lot of money available for not just for Wall Street and stock investing, but also for real estate investing. And a lot of that was allocated to banks that were heavily invested in the city. So, people like Donald Trump and Helmsley Spear and, a host of other developers, both in the city and in the neighboring areas like Jersey and Connecticut, Westchester and Long Island, that these developers have been profiting for decades, with the kind of development they depict in the video, but it's become more varied and less sort of heavy-handed. At times, they still make use of eminent domain, but it's not necessarily the case. So I don't think like the Robert Moses thing ever really ended. They just spiraled it in different directions. But the thing is, like, will that continue? I think there's a really big question, because interest rates now were set to zero almost. Now they've escalated to a slight degree, but they're still very, very low. And basically, if they continue to create huge amounts of money, to print money and lend it to places like New York City, there's probably going to be a hyperinflation. I mean, they've already printed more than enough to create hyperinflation. It's just going to get worse and worse over time. So like all this development, very little of it is probably market driven. I don't know how much. Some of it is. I mean, a lot of it probably is, but a lot of it probably isn't. It's hard to know. You can't really know. And so why would you think that they're going to keep being able to expand the money supply and encourage the kind of urban renewal that's gone on in the city since the war, since World War II? What you saw in the 50s and 60s, what I saw anyway, was sharp decline in the 60s and 70s into the 90s. But then like a huge recovery and huge investments in the city, and this goes back to like Trump's construction of the Grand Hyatt on 42nd Street in the 70s, I think it was. And, from there, it was building up. And so the city's been like largely rehab, but made pretty much a province for the wealthy.
And that was exactly the Robert Moses plan. I mean, it's kind of been implemented, and it's all been done with Fed money. So when the Fed money dries up, why would you think that it would continue? I'm really not sure. You know, the insanity of it is that all this money has been printed to build real estate that was then bought by foreign rich people. You know, a lot of the real estate in the city isn't even bought by Americans at this point. It's like, you know, some billionaire in Brazil or something buys an apartment, or, you know, some Russian oligarch, or, you know, stuff like that. And the people who lived in the city, you know, couldn't even begin to afford the property. And I'm not sure how that could possibly continue. You know, so I don't know what's going to be with the city. It could be that there's like a period of correction, maybe a long period, where there's like a depression and a lot of the waste gets revalued, and you know, things drop to low levels. You know, I used to know a guy whose family was rich, and they when the property values in the city fell, you could buy a brownstone in on the Upper East Side of Manhattan in the East 60s or 70s, in a you know, really affluent area. You could buy for a few $1,000s. You could buy a rich brownstone. In the 70s, I had relatives who owned some tenements on Amsterdam in the 70s and 80s, and they abandoned them. They couldn't. The tenants had all became criminals and drug addicts. They had to like abandon the properties, and they weren't worth anything. But within 30 years, they became worth, you know, millions. So basically, how, you know, what's going to happen is, you know, unknown at this point. But it won't be surprising if there's some kind of major collapse. It really wouldn't be surprising at all.
This is just my opinion. I think New York City is going to end up like San Francisco.
You mean like with the homeless and everything?
You have the homeless, and there's a small minority of the population that holds a good portion of the wealth.
Yeah. Well, I think it's already happened.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I watched those Honeymooner episodes. It really, you know, it's like a forgotten world. You know, when I grew up, I mean, you know, that was how the city was. You know, you lived in a neighborhood, you knew people in the neighborhood. You know, you could afford to buy an apartment. That it wasn't like some big deal. That, you know, you could get a job. You could get a job that, you know, my father was a baker. He had a blue collar job, and we lived in Astoria in an apartment. That apartment now sells. I just sold it to my niece. The market value is $600,000. There's no way someone with a blue collar job could ever afford that place at this point. You know, but in those days, you know, my father could support a family of 4 working in a factory job in Maspeth. It was like a completely different economy. You know, and you can't really capture it through economic measures. Like, you know, you could say, well, the average wage has done this and that, but, you know, when you look at the truth, like who can afford to raise a family in a city where the real estate costs $1 million? You know, I just don't, you know, how could you function, you know, at that level? And the city's been doing it for a long time. I mean, it's nothing new, but, you know, they've already done so much, there's already been so much distortion. And yeah, I won't be surprised if you're right. I'm sure you're right.
Are we witnessing the downfall of America?
The downfall of what?
Of America, like the fall of Rome?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it'll happen tomorrow or
Right.
like in 10 years. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's that. The Rome. It's a really fascinating history. It began to stagnate when the Republic died. The Republic ended with Julius Caesar's, he crossed the Rubicon with his army, which was illegal, you know, and people say that's when the Republic ended. He brought in the army to Rome and it was illegal, and then he took power. And his adopted son, Augustus Octavian, basically took all the power to himself, and that created the empire. And it lasted. There were 200 years of like stability and peace. That's called the Roman peace. What's the term they use? Just trying to remember. Pax Romana. Pax. I kept thinking the Pax Romana, where there was 200 years of peace and stability, but Rome did not grow. In other words, there was stagnation, but peace. And basically the decline was being generated in that long, peaceful period. And then as the issues became more and more prevalent, you started to see more visible signs of decline. So it could be a long period of decline. It doesn't necessarily have to be, overnight, or just because we see these trends, there's still like, you can live a decent life. You're not the growth that we enjoyed in the free period, in the free market period, is gone. There's no way that under socialism or progressivism there will ever be the kinds of economic growth there was under free market capitalism. So there's going to be stagnation, and it could be for a long period of time. It doesn't pay to move out too soon, because you can still have a decent life here compared to most other places. But does that mean we're not in decline? No, I think it's clear that we are. I have little doubt about that.
Professor, do you have an optimistic view for the future of your grandchildren?
I never had children, so I don't have. I can't answer that. But if you want to ask about your grandchildren, I would say
children our age, I guess.
Probably not. In other words, I don't see, like, not in the U.S. anyway. I don't see it as an arc that's upward. I see it as an arc that's downward. So I'm sorry to be pessimistic. I know that doesn't make people feel happy, but that's my feeling.
Tough times create strong men, right?
Pardon?
Tough times create strong men, right?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe things could turn around. Maybe Joshua will invent a new tech thing, and it'll change the world, and everyone will be rich from then on, or something.
Yeah, live video games where it's, you're really there.
We could become the Matrix, and everyone will think we're rich, but
well, actually, I think the main reason why this whole thing, like, America's gonna fall, is because we're in debt to China, and we owe them a lot of money. And
oh, yeah. That again, that's related to the monetary expansion. What's going to happen there, my bet, is that we're simply not going to repay it. We're going to inflate it out of existence.
Yeah.
So in other words, they're printing more and more money. We owe them, I don't know, I forget how much, like $1 trillion or something, or 2 trillion. They're printing more and more money, and the dollars are going to be worthless.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna have $100 bill and buy a candy bar with it.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be down the road. Not tomorrow, but down the road.
So America's gonna end up like post World War I Germany.
Maybe.
What?
Well, I showed you the graph, didn't I, of the M2, the money supply. Did I show that to this class? Here, I'll put it on the screen. I'll screen share. Okay. Here, this is the M2 money supply. When this when this was happening here, this caused Nixon had expanded the money supply, and this caused 14% inflation around here. For some reason, all this has not caused anything close to that. It's been inflation. Part of it's they distorted the reporting statistics, in particular by excluding housing. So there's been a huge housing bubble, but because like stock investments and housing have been excluded, and banks have lent a large share of the printed money to Wall Street and real estate, it hasn't caught the general population. So what you see here is like, okay, so in 59, the money supply was like 300 billion. In 80, 21 years later, it was 1.5 trillion. So it had increased fivefold, which is pretty rapid. Now, look at this increase. This was just this year. Now it's 19 trillion. Okay, so if you go from 2000, so it's quadrupled in the last 20 odd year, like 20 years or so. So it's more than tripled, but prices haven't more than tripled. Prices have gone up, 40%, 50%. So basically there's this huge amount of money that has yet to cause inflation. But look at now what's going to happen if interest rates go up to the historic norms, which are like 4%, that's going to drastically increase the amount of interest that the federal government has to pay on debt, and they can't operate without taking out new debt. So they're basically going to bankrupt themselves, and if interest rates go up, so they're going to have to keep printing money to keep the interest rates down. And when they do that, it's like been astonishing to me that we haven't seen inflation. This is basically like Banana Republic stuff.
But how about the growing population? Doesn't that balance it out?
It's nowhere close, Joshua. In other words, from 2000 till now, the money supply, it's gone from 5 to 20.
Google says that in 10 years, the $100 bill is going to be only $75.
That could be. I don't know how they would know a thing like that, but it's certainly possible. So, it's hard to know. These things intersect with like behavioral choices that people make, like the expansion of the money supply, because the money had, until like the last year or two, they were careful to like just give it to Wall Street. And this was like causing the famous income inequality that everyone complains about, because Wall Street could borrow it and then invest it overseas and stuff like that. And meanwhile, they were using it to relocate plants. And so it was like, people were not really benefiting from it, except for investors. And I don't think that's gonna change, because if it does, then interest rates will shoot up, and the federal government will have huge debts that they won't be able to handle. So it's hard to know if interest rates do shoot up, and there's the government can't control it, that it could happen. In that case, there could be like real problems with like the US being unable to service its own debts.
Yeah, they spent billions of dollars in green services, in greeneries and stuff like that for the environment. So to protect.
You name it.
Yeah, it's completely a waste of money. Completely.
They're wasting money in almost every. I mean, they gave everyone $1,400.
Yeah, that's wasting money. They think that's going to invigorate the economy. That's only causing inflation.
Yeah, it's just they're insane. So it's basically they've gone crazy. And they're going to keep doing it until I think also like the change to distributing the money to the public rather than just leaving it with the investors, that's gonna hasten the inflation increases.
And maybe change the stock market, because people with this extra, well, I don't know if it's extra to people, but I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of people are using it to speculate. Also, they're using it to buy stuff. So you're gonna see somewhat more inflation, and you're gonna see somewhat more stock bubbles, I think.
Yeah, for one day, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Bubbles last. A lot of people, like you, even bought Tesla. I would watch that very carefully. I mean, that's a
Tesla is
very
going up to 2,700 in the next 5 years. It's supposedly gonna increase 500-fold, according to 30 analysts.
yeah, but the bubbles are always like that. They always agree.
I mean, if they're
Everybody-
blue chip, if they're already $1 billion over, they have so much money, so they're not going down. They're
right,
definitely not.
You're right. You've been right so far, and I've been wrong. So let's look at Tesla stock for a second. Max. All right.
Yeah, see that?
Well, it fell recently. That's interesting. 880 to 6. So it fell by a quarter. Now it's inching back.
Yeah, I got it when it was 670. So hopefully, yeah, it's gonna come back, hopefully.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Elon Musk
I
is
hope you didn't
focusing
put,
on
you didn't put too much in it. Like just put a little.
only
Okay,
one
please
share,
do that.
only one share.
Oh, just
It's
one
not-
share. Okay. All right.
Yeah, just one share.
If it goes bankrupt, you won't. If it becomes like the next Amazon, then you'll get rich from it. Otherwise, we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah.
Be
All right,
careful
I'm
of
gonna
those
go.
kind of bubble things. That you can see from this. This is the shape of a parabola. That's usually the sign of a bubble.
Yeah, the sign of, but they said that it's not, many of them said that it's a strong buy, that it shouldn't, it's not supposed to be a sell.
Exactly
now.
what they did in the internet days when the internet bubble. This is Amazon. The funny thing is you can't even see the.
No, Amazon, I don't fully
You're
trust
not interested
Amazon.
in that one.
Not really. No, I think it reached its high already. It's already at the top,
Could well be. Okay, well, we'll find out when we find out. We won't know before that.
Yep.
Okay,
And then we'll say we're wrong. We were wrong.
yeah.
We should have.
Okay, guys, see
All right,
Kevin left. I didn't realize that. Okay, Josh, I'll see you next week. Nice. I always enjoy our chats afterwards.
All right. Have a good